On May 19th, 2013, Gary Elvord passed away due to a brain tumor as an inmate in Florida. He had been convicted of multiple murders in 1974 and met his end 39 years later in his cell. The difference between Elvord and most other inmates is that he was sentenced to death in 1974. He died of natural causes after being on death row for 39 years. Compared to the typical case, Elvord's is longer, but the average death row inmate spends 20 years awaiting execution. Today, I will explain why the death penalty should not be used. The main reasons are possible wrongful convictions, the costs associated with death row, and its morality. I have conducted a lot of research into the different sides of the issue, especially in the wake of the recent ban on the death penalty in Nebraska, and I feel I have a very educated view on the subject. Firstly, wrongful conviction on death row happens and makes the American justice system look primitive and unfair. Imagine a loved one being wrongfully accused of a violent or otherwise severe crime. Instead of the judicial process uncovering the truth and pronouncing them innocent, they are convicted and sentenced to die by the same government they trusted to clear their name. In some cases, through appeals and newly discovered evidence, they may be exonerated and removed from death row. DNA evidence has revolutionized the potential for proving and disproving guilt. In the last 43 years, 156 living death row inmates have been exonerated and completely pardoned by the U.S. government, which comes out to just over 3 per year. This includes 7 people in 2015 alone. Some inmates, however, are executed with doubtful guilt. Since exoneration investigations are typically not done after death, it is hard to know how many people were wrongly convicted of the 1,400 death row inmates that have been executed since 1977. Even with our country's extensive set of laws and thorough judiciary system, it is still run by humans and thus prone to error. A person serving a life sentence can always be released from prison. Executing someone is permanent and cannot be remedied at all in the future. Next, death penalty cases cost a lot more money and time than a regular conviction. This seems counterintuitive to a lot of people, since the conviction means taxpayers will be supporting the criminal's life in prison for many years, potentially decades. The death penalty ends the process in a relatively quick manner. The problem with death row cases are the extensive legal proceedings required for each. There is a reason that the average inmate spends 20 years on death row. They are allowed several appeals at both the state and federal levels. For each of these appeals, months of preparation are required in an attempt to be as thorough as possible. An inmate is appointed 2 attorneys by the state to handle their defense. New impartial juries must be formed for each case. For however long these proceedings take, which is almost always at least a few years, the inmate is given hospitality inside of a prison. In the end, the actual execution costs a fair bit of money. In 2011, a local NBC news station in Washington conducted a study into the difference in costs. Using a 2006 report from the State Bar Association, death row legal proceedings cost on average, and this is the bottom section on this bar graph, costs on average $1,028,000. That is purely legal fees and also costs a lot of manpower. Using an average for prison cost and a 14-year stay on death row, which is the average in Washington, accommodations will cost around $600,000, which is the top lighter shaded section. 2010 lethal injection costed around $100,000 in total, which is the slightly hard to see middle slim section. These 3 components add up to $1.7 million in costs for a 14-year case on death row. Using the same prison cost average from earlier, as well as an average life expectancy, it would cost around $1.3 million to send a 29-year-old to prison for life. So as you can see on the graph, sending someone to prison for life comes out about $400,000 cheaper than a death row sentence. Obviously, total cost will vary on a case-to-case basis, but in general, the cost of a death sentence is higher than a life sentence. Finally, the death penalty is immoral. The goal of the prison system is simple: detain criminals from the world as a form of punishment, and at the same time provide an opportunity for rehabilitation. The death penalty does not achieve this goal. By taking an inmate's life, the government is not even giving them a chance at rehabilitation, which is what they should always be striving for. Furthermore, it is debatable whether the government should even be able to make a decision of this magnitude purely based on how the judicial system works. Brian Stevenson, a professor of law at New York University School of Law, says in a paper from 2004, quote, "Ultimately, the moral question surrounding capital punishment in America has less to do with whether those convicted of a violent crime deserve to die than whether the state and federal governments deserve to kill those whom it has imprisoned. The legacy of racial apartheid, racial bias, and ethnic discrimination is unavoidably evident in the administration of capital punishment in America. Death sentences are imposed in a criminal justice system that treats you better if you are rich and guilty than if you are poor and innocent. This is an immoral condition that makes rejecting the death penalty on moral grounds not only defensible but necessary for those who refuse to accept unequal or unjust administration of punishment." End quote. That was a very long passage, but what Stevenson is trying to say is that in any legal case, those with more money are able to hire the best attorney possible, giving them a better chance at winning. On the other side of things, the poor must stick with public defenders that are randomly assigned to them just to fill a minimum requirement. And on the topic of race, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 57% of people charged with 2009 were black. And that is represented on this pie graph by the darker shaded section. Additionally, almost half of all people charged with felonies were also black. And these numbers are extremely disproportionate when considering that only 12.6% of the country is African American. Discrepancies like these are why the government, specifically the judicial branch, should not be able to condemn a person to death. The death penalty is a method that just doesn't make sense in today's world. This was covered by the topics of wrongful convictions, excessive costs, and morality. The death penalty is an outdated, uncivilized way to treat citizens of this country and should never be actually used.